Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about and juxtapose what life was like in Europe before Christianity and what it's been after Christianity, to tell atheists and remind atheists that you have it pretty good living in a Christian world. Now, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, Secutorum principio et nunc et semper et seculi seculorum. Amen. Now I am doing this episode pre-dawn, that's why it's a little dark. This episode is really meant for atheists, I think, but it's also a reminder for all Christians. We don't really have a lot of episodes directed toward atheists. I think there's one about how atheists shouldn't be celebrating Christmas, and I think we have one that touches a little about what we're going to talk about today. But atheists have it good living in the West. The effect of Christianity has been good for the atheists, and the atheists don't even realize this. I think a really good book to read is Thomas Wood's How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization. And not because it's pro-Catholic or anything like that, but it reminds people that if you look at science, if you look at human law, natural law, if you look at university system, if you look at hospitals, you look at many aspects of what we have today, or the West is known for, a lot of it got its origins in Christianity. But the inspiration for this episode is I recently saw the movie Norseman. It came out last year, and it talks about the Vikings at the cusp of Christianity entering the present-day Scandinavia, where they were from. And it reminded me of like what Europe was like prior to the advent of Christianity. You can go back to just ancient Rome in general to see this, but once you move out of the more civilized areas of the Mediterranean basin during this time and move out to let's say the Celtic areas of England and France and further out, it was kind of a brutal world. And you see this kind of echoed out in Mesoamerica when the conquistadors got to the world of the Aztecs and down to the Incas. We have this idea of the noble savage trope. And the noble savage trope is essentially, in the most reductionistic view, is white people bad, everybody else good. And so with the noble savage trope, you see played out in a movie like Dances with Wolves, and in Frozen 2, you kind of see a repackaging of this, is that these people lived, the non-white, Western Christianized people lived this idyllic life where they were just singing Kumbaya and sitting around a fire, which is absolutely not true. And so when you watch movies like Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, which takes place but in the Mayan civilization right before the advent of the conquistadors, or a movie like Norseman, which is more or less at 1000 AD, you realize that the natives didn't have that. There wasn't a lot of human rights with in these cultures. So what do I mean by that? You saw a lot of child sacrifice. You saw a lot of human sacrifice in general. Pagan cultures as a whole were not very egalitarian in any way, shape, or form. Certainly there wasn't any sort of guilty until proven innocent. You have rights inspired by God. No, it was very tyrannical. It was very arbitrary. It was might makes right and so forth. So when you look at movies like Apocalypto and Norseman, pagan cultures, you see this played out with Halloween. You look at the Celtic and Druid origins of that festival. But in general, if you just look at Celtic, Druid, and essentially pagan cultures of the West prior to Christianity, there was a lot of human sacrifice going on. There was a lot of slavery going on, tons of slavery. We forget that. When we think of slavery, we think white man enslaving the black man. Well, we could spend tons of time unpacking that, where the largest slave traders in human history were actually the Arabs, but we can't say that. And we can't say, well, yes, for sure there was the transatlantic slave trade, but America only had it for 70 years, and then we sacrificed 700,000 lives, mostly white lives, to end it. We can't say things like this. And we can't say that slavery is just a part of kind of the human experience throughout time. And if you're asking the American government for reparations, you should essentially be asking every country's government, because every part of the world had slavery at one time in their existence. But either way, let's not go off that course. So it was a very brutal time. And then Christianity came. And Christianity outlawed human sacrifice. Look over in India, the practice of sute, where when a man died, his wife would be expected to be burned alive in the funeral pyre of the man. When the British got there, they outlawed that. And again, it took time because it's incrementalism. You can't just go in and do that because the people aren't going to handle it. But you bring in Christian values and virtues, and then you slowly impart this into the people to outlaw it. So the time before Christianity was a bad time for the large majority of people in these cultures, whether it be in Norway, Iceland, present-day Scotland, Ireland, France, Spain, anywhere where there were pagans. A large majority of them were slaves, and a large majority of them were at the whims of either the priestly class, like in the Norsemen, it'd be the berserkers, the priestly class, who were just very arbitrary. Oh, our crops weren't good this year. It's because fill in the blank god or goddesses need more blood, so we're going to sacrifice 20 babies. I mean, is that right? So even you atheists could agree. Yeah, you probably would have want your atheistic baby to be sacrificed. So Christianity brought this, and so we've had the age of Pisces for about 2,000 years in Europe. And now we've kind of seen in the 20th century what life is like when you take Christianity out of it. And if you look, what was the biggest killer of the 20th century? It wasn't necessarily germs, heart disease, cancer. It was democide. And what's democide? Murder by government. So we talked about this a little in one of the history episodes. You look at countries that completely eradicated Christianity and in fact outlawed, and this is mostly going to be the communist nations, under the USSR, under communist China with Mao, under Pol Pot in Cambodia, the Kim family in North Korea, the Castros over in Cuba. You look at this, and there was a whole loss of life, either through purging in camps for people who didn't abide by the revolution, or later the revolution turned on them, or misallocation of resources, collectivization of agriculture, where you saw this played out, especially in the Soviet Union in the 1930s with the command economy, where Stalin would be like, we're going to grow corn over there, we're going to grow rice in the Ukraine. But rice doesn't grow in that area. Shut up, we're going to grow rice. So they try to grow rice. The rice doesn't grow, so instead of having wheat, everybody starves, and 25 million people die of starvation. You saw this played out over in the Great Leap Forward over in China as well. So we saw a mass loss of life. Depending on the estimates, you're looking at 100 million people died in the 20th century in communist countries. And this is even mentioned in a Harvard book. And don't tell me Harvard is this bastion of conservatism. The Black Book of Communism, you can get this book on Amazon, that talks about the evil atrocities of communism. So we saw what society was like pre-Christian, and we saw what society was like post-Christian. Neither of them bode well for the large majority of people. So in closing, atheists, count your blessings that you live in a somewhat Christian West, and it's somewhat Christian because of your works and you falling for the cultural Marxist lie of atheism. Because remember, atheism is not endogenous in people. Throughout human experience, we are wired for the religious. Always. In every culture. Throughout time. You didn't find a lot of atheists in 500 BC, 1000 BC. Now they might be worshiping what we would call today false gods, but we are wired for the transcendent. The idea of atheism is actually a tool of the Marxists, the cultural Marxists. So don't be deceived in thinking that you're something special. I mean, it's by far the sin of intellectual hubris. I'm smarter than these people who believe in hocus pocus superstition. I know better. No, you're being manipulated by the Marxists. But just like homosexuals who take have a lot of rights in the West, they don't know how good they got it. Why don't you go to Saudi Arabia and try to practice your homosexual acts over there? That's not going to fly. So look, Christianity has brought a lot of benefits. to wherever it's gone. And yes, there's been flaws and sins of colonialism, absolutely. But like we talked about in the episode about slavery, the Catholic Church has condemned slavery in 7 different occasions since the 1500s. And when conquistadors or plantation owners or fill in the blank people identify as Christians do bad things like proselytize or subjugate people or rape their slaves, that's not an indictment on Christianity. That's an indictment on the human nature. You're always going to find good and bad people regardless. And we can tell, the church can tell people rape is bad, slavery is bad. Doesn't mean that people are going to listen. Look at the example of abortion. The church has taught since the beginning, that's why it's part of the deposit of faith, that abortion's wrong, killing the unborn's wrong. A lot of Christians support abortion. So the church can say one thing, the church can be consistent on a lot of these social teachings, but just because people identify as Christians don't follow it is not an overall indictment that Christianity is a horrible religion. No, Christianity is a benign, beautiful religion that has helped the world in every way, shape, or form. And in any atheists who have issues with Christianity, I would tell you that you really need to count your blessings, because life was a lot worse, and your ancestors that made it through the pagan times in Europe, pre-Christian, were fortunate not to be sacrificed. And if any of you had ancestors or relatives that were in Russia or in China, they will tell you the horrors of communism. And you talk to any immigrant from these places. I have friends that are Vietnamese. They'll tell you the horrors of growing up in a communist country and how their ancestors fled for a reason. They'll tell you that all these things have come to America and America's slowly turning this way. We don't want a non-Christian West. A non-Christian West is going to lead to a lot of dysfunction and ultimately a lot of death. Christianity has been good for the world. Guys, post in comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.